The hum of the engine filled the quiet space inside the car, a soothing contrast to the tension brewing in the mind of Ava Smith, a highly trained and respected black FBI agent. Ava wasn't just any agent. Over the years, she had become an expert in counterterrorism, infiltrating some of the most dangerous and elusive extremist cells across the country. Her instincts were honed through countless missions, but today, she was more cautious than usual. The assignment she had undertaken was personal. She had been chasing the leads on this case for months, one that involved a powerful, covert criminal network tied to illegal arms trafficking and terrorism financing. This group wasn't just any criminal organization. They had deep roots in both criminal and law enforcement circles, a dangerous mix of corruption that extended into areas even she was hesitant to explore. Dressed casually in a worn leather jacket and jeans, Ava was on her way back from a clandestine meeting with a key figure from the organization. The meeting had gone well, too well, perhaps. Her target, a mid-level operative, had been eager to share information, more than willing to believe her cover story about being a disillusioned former federal agent looking for new opportunities. He had given her critical information that could help the FBI make a major arrest, but there was something off. Ava had a nagging feeling in her gut, the kind that had saved her life more times than she could count. Her instincts whispered that something was about to go wrong, that she wasn't as invisible as she hoped to be. She navigated the quiet suburban streets. She glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her deep brown eyes, framed by tired but determined features, stared back at her. But she had always been proud of who she was, a strong, intelligent black woman in a profession where people like her were often underrepresented and become often represented. Ava had worked hard to break through the barriers of race and gender that still lingered in the FBI, and now she was one of the best in her field. But that didn't mean she was immune to the challenges that came with being a woman of color and law enforcement. There had been many times when her credentials were questioned, or when her authority was undermined by those who couldn't see past her skin color. Today, she feared, might be one of these days. A rented SUV, a sleek black vehicle that ended into the more affluent neighborhoods, cruised through the suburban roads lined with manicured lawns and luxurious homes. The streets were eerily quiet at this hour, the only movement coming from the occasional dog walker or jogger. Ava's mind was on high alert, processing everything she had learned at the meeting, mentally mapping out her next steps. She knew she had to get this information back to headquarters, but she also needed to remain cautious. One wrong move and her cover could be blown along with months of undercover work. Just as she was about to make a turn onto the highway, the flicker of red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Ava's heart sank. She immediately slowed down, pulling over to the side of the road, her mind racing through the possibilities. Had she been made? Were the police working with the criminals she was investigating, or was this just an unfortunate coincidence? She took a deep breath, her hands steady on the wheel, though her heart pounded in her chest. But she had been stopped before many times, in fact. Being a black woman driving an expensive car in a wealthy neighborhood often invited unwarranted attention from the police, but this felt different. Ava glanced at the rearview mirror again, watching as the two officers approached her car. Their body language was tense, aggressive even. Something about the way they moved set off alarms in her head. To one of the officers, Officer Sam Carter was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, with a square jaw and a hardened expression. His partner, Officer Jack Mason, followed closely behind him, his hand resting casually on the holster of his gun. Ava had seen this type before, officers who were quick to assume the worst based on nothing more than the color of a person's skin. Carter's eyes were narrowed as he approached her window, his posture stiff and authoritarian. Ava rolled down the window, maintaining a calm, neutral expression. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Carter's gaze flicked over her face, then down to her hands which were resting on the steering wheel. He didn't answer her question right away, instead choosing to assess her with the kind of suspicion she had encountered too many times before. Without preamble, he said, "License and registration." Ava complied without hesitation, reaching into the glove compartment documents. She moved slowly, deliberately, making sure to keep her movements measured so as not to provoke any reaction. Her FBF credentials were tucked away in her wallet, just behind her driver's license. But she handed both over to Carter, her badge visible, hoping it would be enough to de-escalate the situation. But as Carter glanced at her badge, his expression didn't soften. Instead, a sneer appeared on his face. "FBI, huh? That's a new one," he muttered, tossing a glance back at Mason, who let out a derisive chuckle. "Do you really expect us to believe that?" Ava's heart sank further. She had encountered disbelief and skepticism about her position before, but rarely had it been this overt. She kept her voice level. "I'm on duty. If you'd like, I can call my supervisor and verify everything." Carter shook his head, clearly not interested in any form of verification. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his hand now resting on his holster. Mason, standing a few feet behind, watched with a smirk on his face, clearly enjoying the situation. Ava knew she had no choice. She couldn't afford to escalate this. With every muscle in her body tense, she slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car, her hands raised slightly to show she was no threat. "You're making a mistake," she said firmly, her eyes locking onto Carter's. But Carter wasn't listening. He moved closer, eyeing her with contempt. "Turn around, hands behind your back," he ordered. Mason stepped forward, ready with the handcuffs. Ava felt a surge of anger and frustration, but she kept her composure. She had to. This was no ordinary stop. She knew deep down that these men were connected to something much larger, something that could unravel everything she had worked for. As the cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Ava realized that the battle was only just beginning. These officers weren't just pulling her over, they were part of the corruption she had been investigating, and now they had her in their grip. As the cold metal cuffs clamped down on Ava's wrists, her mind raced, a mixture of frustration, anger, and calculation swirling within her. Her hands, now restrained behind her back, ached slightly from the tightness, but she knew better than to make a scene. She had been through enough to understand that any display of resistance, real or imagined, could make this situation spiral out of control even faster. Despite the degrading feeling of being treated like a common criminal, Ava's professional instincts kicked in, urging her to stay calm, to observe and to think several steps ahead. Officer Carter's smug expression never wavered as he roughly guided her toward the patrol car. "You don't look like any FBI agent I've ever seen," he muttered, giving her a sideways glance full of contempt. "But don't worry, sweetheart. We'll get this all straightened out at the station." The sarcasm in his voice was thick, and Ava recognized that any attempt to reason with him now would be futile. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her body as she tried to maintain her composure, and she wanted to shout, to tell him that he was making a grave mistake, but there was no point. Carter's eyes were already clouded with prejudice, and Mason, who had been quieter but no less complicit, seemed fully prepared to follow his partner's lead. As Ava was seated in the back of the patrol car, her thoughts turned to her mission. This wasn't just an ordinary stop gone wrong, she was certain now. The way Carter and Mason had reacted to her badge almost too dismissively suggested something deeper was at play. She knew that this part of the city had been a hotspot for illegal arms deals connected to the very organization she was investigating. But if these officers were in any way involved, her situation had just escalated from frustrating to potentially deadly. Ava quickly assessed her options. She had no way of signaling her team directly, as she'd left her secure communication device back at the safe house for security reasons. But the FBI knew her itinerary. If she didn't check in within a few hours, they'd come looking. The problem was, with her cover now in jeopardy and potentially rogue cops holding her, she wasn't sure how much time she had before things got worse. "Why are you doing this?" Ava finally asked, her voice steady but firm. "You saw my badge. You know who I am." Carter glanced back at her through the rearview mirror, his lips curling into a sneer. "Yeah, I saw your little badge. Pretty good forgery if you ask me. But you don't fool me. People like you think they can just flash something shiny and get away with whatever they want." His tone was venomous, and the underlying accusation stung people like you. It wasn't just a reference to her status as an agent. It was something deeper, uglier. Mason shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat. Ava caught his reflection in the side mirror and saw the brief flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. For a split second, she thought maybe he would speak up, maybe he would question Carter's handling of the situation. But the Mason's face hardened again and he turned back toward the road, slyly complicit. They were taking her to the station, but Ava sensed that this was no ordinary arrest. She needed to get more information fast. "Look," she started again, carefully choosing her words, "you're making a serious mistake. I'm part of an active investigation, and if you take me in like this, you're jeopardizing it." Carter chuckled, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the steering wheel. "An active investigation? Huh? What, are we supposed to believe you're some kind of secret agent now? Please, spare me the theatrics." His eyes flicked back to her, colder now. "If you're really who you say you are, then why are you out here alone dressed like that, driving a car that isn't registered to you?" Ava clenched her jaw. She had anticipated questions like this, but it was impossible to explain everything without revealing classified details of her undercover operation. "The car belongs to the agency," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "And I'm dressed this way because I'm undercover. If you check my credentials with your precinct, they'll verify everything." "Sure they will," Carter muttered under his breath, clearly not interested in pursuing any kind of verification. He and Mason exchanged a quick glance, something unspoken passing between them. That glance unsettled Ava more than anything else. What weren't they saying? As they drove deeper into the city, Ava noticed that the usual route to the precinct wasn't being followed. They weren't heading toward the main station at all. Instead, the car turned off onto a more isolated road, the kind that led away from the hustle and bustle of the city center and into a more industrial area. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just an arrest, this was something else. She had no idea where they were taking her, but she knew she had to act soon. Her instincts screamed at her to fight back, to do something, but with her wrists cuffed and 2 officers in control, her options were limited. Ava pressed her back against the seat, forcing herself to breathe slowly and think clearly. She needed to gather information, to figure out exactly what Carter and Mason were planning. "You're not taking me to the station, are you?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. Carter didn't respond right away. He kept his eyes on the road, his jaw set. Finally, he said, "Let's just say we have a few questions we'd like to ask you first. And we don't need an official precinct for that." The Mason's silence was even more unnerving. Ava could feel the tension radiating from him, the way his fingers twitched slightly against his leg as he tried to maintain his composure. He wasn't fully on board with this plan, whatever it was, but he wasn't stopping it either. Ava's heart raced as the car continued its path away from any familiar landmarks. She had been in life-threatening situations before, but this was different. She wasn't dealing with enemies from the outside. She was trapped with 2 rogue officers who had taken the law into their own hands, and the full extent of their motives remained unclear. Suddenly, the car pulled into an empty warehouse lot. The building looked old, abandoned even, with rusted metal gates and faded signs warning trespassers to stay out. Ava's stomach tightened as Carter parked the car and turned off the engine. The eerie quiet of the lot was suffocating, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Carter turned around in his seat, finally looking directly at her. "Let's make something clear," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not FBI. You're not undercover. And you're not going anywhere until we figure out who the hell you really are." Ava's mind raced, calculating her next move. She was still restrained, but she knew if she didn't act soon, the situation could escalate beyond her control. She scanned her surroundings, taking in every detail, looking for anything that could give her the upper hand. But before she could make her move, Mason, still in the passenger seat, cleared his throat. "Sam, maybe we should just take her to the station," he said, his voice wavering. This isn't what we're supposed to do." Carter glared at him, the tension between the two officers now palpable. "Are you serious right now?" Carter spat, his patience clearly thinning. "Do you really think someone like her is just going to walk out of here with a slap on the wrist? She's lying. She's hiding something." Ava remained silent, watching the cracks in their partnership start to form. She knew this was her chance, the opening she needed to turn the situation to her advantage. But she also knew that if she miscalculated, if she made a move too soon or just said the wrong thing, she might not get another opportunity. Taking a slow, measured breath, Ava met Carter's gaze head-on. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I am hiding something. And if you take me back to the station, I'll tell you exactly what it is." Carter stared at her, his eyes narrowing. For the first time there was a flicker of doubt in his expression, a moment of hesitation. He was calculating, weighing his options. Ava knew she had just thrown him off balance, now she just had to keep him there. Mason shifted in his seat again, his discomfort growing more obvious by the second. "Sam, maybe we should listen to her. If she really is FBI, and we screw this up." But Carter wasn't listening anymore. His mind was already made up. He opened his door, stepping out into the lot. "Get her out of the car," he ordered Mason coldly. "We'll see what she has to say when she's not so comfortable." As the evening sky darkened, the industrial lot where Ava had been taken seemed to close in on her, casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt. The heavy, oppressive silence was only broken by the sound of Officer Carter's boots crunching against the ground as he moved purposefully toward the back of the patrol car. The distant sound of cars from the main road was a dull hum in the background, but here, in this desolate space, it felt like they were miles away from anyone who might be able to help her. Ava's mind raced as she tried to anticipate her next move. She had faced life-threatening situations before, both during her work as an undercover agent and in the many dangerous missions she'd been on. But this was different. This wasn't a standoff with armed criminals or terrorists. This was two police officers who had turned on the very system they were supposed to protect. Carter and Mason weren't just rogue officers, they were likely involved with the same criminal organization Ava had been working to expose. And now they had her alone, isolated, far from the safety of the FBI's diction, with no backup and no way to communicate with her team. The handcuffs on her wrists bit into her skin as Mason, still showing signs of uncertainty, hesitated before opening the back door of the patrol car. His reluctance gave Ava a flicker of hope. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened as he glanced at his partner, then back at her. Carter, on the other hand, was resolute, his expression one of cold determination. He was in control, and he wasn't about to let anything or anyone challenge that. Mason finally gave in to Carter's silent pressure, unlocking the door and pulling Ava out roughly by the arm. The cool night air hit her face as she stumbled forward, regaining her balance quickly. Even in handcuffs, Ava stood tall, refusing to show any sign of weakness. She met Carter's gaze head-on, unflinching. "So, what's the plan?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with steel. You've already made it clear you don't believe me, so what are you going to do now? Carter smirked, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer, towering over her. The plan, he said slowly, is to get some real answers. And since you're so good at playing the role of an agent, I'm sure you've got plenty of stories to tell. Ava didn't flinch. She knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to break her, to make her panic, but she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She had dealt with far worse than this. The trick was to stay one step ahead, to keep him guessing. I've told you who I am, she replied, her voice steady. But you're not interested in hearing it, so let's skip the part where you pretend you're after the truth. What do you really want? For a moment, Carter's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected her to remain so composed, but instead of backing down, he took another step toward her, close enough that Ava could smell the stale coffee on his breath. You think you're smart, don't you? He hissed. Think you're going to outwit me? You're in my world now, and here you don't get to call the shots. Ava's pulse quickened, but she refused to break eye contact. Your world, she shot back. Last I checked, we're both supposed to be on the same side. Law enforcement, remember, or have you forgotten what your badge stands for? Carter's expression darkened. He grabbed her arm roughly, spinning her around and pushing her toward the warehouse entrance. You don't get to lecture me, sweetheart, he snarled. Not when you're the one hiding behind a fake badge. The Mason followed behind, his face a mask of discomfort. He had remained silent for most of the interaction, and Ava could sense the internal conflict building within him. She had to find a way to exploit that. If she could turn him, if she could plant just enough doubt in his mind, she might have a chance. As they approached the warehouse doors, Carter yanked them open with a creak. The inside of the building was even more foreboding than the outside. The large open space was dimly lit by a few flickering overhead lights, casting eerie shadows across the concrete floor. Stacks of old crates and rusting metal equipment lined the walls, giving the impression that this place hadn't been used in years. It was the perfect location for someone looking to do something without witnesses. Ava was led toward the center of the room, where Carter roughly pushed her down onto an old wooden chair. The cuffs on her wrists prevented her from catching herself, and she landed hard, the impact sending a sharp pain up her spine. She gritted her teeth, refusing to let out any sound of discomfort. Carter leaned in close, his face mere inches from hers. You're going to tell me who you're working for, he said, his voice low and menacing. Because I don't believe for a second that you're FBI. And even if you were, that means you're in deeper into this than I thought. Eva's mind was working overtime. She needed to buy herself time, but she also needed to figure out how much these two knew. If they were connected to the organization she was investigating, then they were a serious threat. But if they were simply corrupt cops looking for a quick payout, they might be more easily manipulated. I told you I'm on an undercover operation, she said, her voice calm but firm. You can verify everything if you just make the call. Carter's expression hardened. You really don't get it, do you? I'm not calling anyone. You're off the grid now. No one's coming to save you. The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. She had known the risks of going undercover, known that there was always a chance something could go wrong. But now, with her cover blown and two rogue cops holding her, the danger was more real than ever. And yet, even in the face of this looming threat, Ava felt a surge of resolve. She wasn't going down without a fight. Mason shifted uncomfortably from his position near the door. Sam, he started, his voice uncertain. Maybe we should. Carter cut him off with a sharp glance. We're doing this my way, he snapped. You got a problem with that? For Mason didn't respond, but the tension between the two men was palpable. Ava could see the cracks in their partnership growing, and she knew she had to push them further. She had to make Mason doubt Carter's leadership, make him question what they were doing. I listened to him, Ava said, turning her gaze to Mason. You're smarter than this. You know something's not right here. Mason's eyes flicked to hers for a brief moment, and she could see the hesitation there. But before he could respond, Carter grabbed Ava by the collar, yanking her forward so that her face was inches from his. Enough, he growled. You don't get to talk anymore. He let go of her roughly, and Ava fell back against the chair, her heart racing. Carter was losing control, and that made him even more dangerous. She needed to find a way out of this situation before it escalated further. The sound of a payphone ringing broke the tense silence. Mason reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone and glancing at the screen. "It's the station," he said, his voice tense. "They're asking about the patrol." Carter's expression darkened even further. "Don't answer it." Mason hesitated for a moment, then silenced the phone, slipping it back into his pocket. Ava could feel the shift in the air. Carter was pushing Mason too far, and if she could capitalize on that, she might have a chance. "You don't want to do this," she said softly, addressing Mason directly. "You don't want to be part of whatever he's planning." Carter turned on her, his eyes blazing with fury. "Shut up." But Ava wasn't backing down. She kept her eyes on Mason, watching the conflict play out across his face. "You can still stop this," she continued. "You can still make it right." Mason looked like he was on the verge of saying something when Carter exploded. He grabbed Ava by the arm, yanking her out of the chair and pushing her toward the wall. Her back hit the cold concrete hard, and for a moment, the breath was knocked out of her. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" Carter snarled, his face inches from hers. "Maybe I need to teach you a lesson." Ava's heart pounded in her chest as Carter's grip tightened on her arm. She could see the anger in his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly with barely contained rage. He was on the edge of losing control completely. But before Carter could do anything more, Mason stepped forward, grabbing his partner by the shoulder. "Sam, stop," he said, his voice firm. Carter froze, his grip on Ava loosening slightly. "What did you say?" he demanded, turning to face Mason. "I said stop," Mason repeated, his voice stronger now. "This isn't right. We need to take her back to the station." Carter's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Ava thought he was going to lash out at Mason, but instead he let go of her arm, stepping back with a snarl of frustration. "You don't get to make the calls here, Jack," Carter said, his voice low and dangerous. "I do." Mason didn't back down. "I'm not doing this anymore, Sam. We're taking her back. Now." The tension between the two men was thick, but Ava could see that Mason was finally standing up to Carter. She wasn't sure how far it would go, but it was enough for now. Enough to give her a chance. Carter stared at Mason for a long moment, his jaw clenched tight. Then, with a sharp curse, he turned away, stalking toward the door of the warehouse. "Fine," he spat. "But this isn't over." Mason let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, then turned to Ava, his expression grim. "Let's go." Ava's heart was still racing, but she nodded, following Mason out of the warehouse and back toward the patrol car. Her wrists were still bound, but she had a glimmer of hope now. Mason had finally taken a stand, and that meant she had an ally at last. As they drove away from the warehouse, Ava glanced at Mason in the rearview mirror. His face was set in a grim line, but she could see the uncertainty still lingering in his eyes. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. Mason didn't respond, but she could see the tension in his shoulders relax just slightly. They were heading back to the station now, but Ava knew this wasn't over. Carter wasn't going to let this go, and the organization she had been investigating was still out there, waiting in the shadows. But for now she had survived, and that was enough. The patrol car hummed as it navigated through the dimly lit streets, heading away from the desolate warehouse lot where the first cracks in Officer Carter and Mason's partnership had formed. Ava sat in the back, her wrists still bound, Though the tension between her and her captors was palpable, the night outside had deepened, and the passing lights of the city cast fleeting shadows across her face. But inside the car, the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. The Mason, now behind the wheel, was driving them back toward the station as he'd insisted, but Ava could sense the conflict that still raged inside him. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with the force of his hold. In the rearview mirror, Ava could see the strain etched across his face. He had finally made a stand against Carter, but the consequences of that decision were still unraveling in his mind. For the first time, Mason had taken control, but it wasn't without a cost. In the passenger seat, Carter sat in stony silence, his jaw clenched tightly, the rage barely contained beneath his otherwise calm exterior. Every now and then, his eyes flicked toward Mason, as if calculating how much further his partner would go to defy him. The dynamic had shifted, but Carter wasn't done yet. Ava could feel it. He was planning something, but she wasn't sure what. She had to remain vigilant. The minutes passed slowly, each one filled with a taut silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Ava could feel the bruises forming on her wrists where the handcuffs had cut into her skin. Her body was aching from the rough treatment, but her mind remained sharp. She knew the stakes had just been raised. There was no going back now. Too much had already been set in motion. Just as the faint outline of the city police station came into view on the horizon, the car jerked suddenly. Mason cursed under his breath as the vehicle swerved slightly before coming to a complete stop. Ava's heart skipped a beat. What now? What the hell is going on? Carter snapped, turning to Mason with a glare. Mason shook his head, his brows furrowing as he looked at the dashboard. I don't know, I think we've got a flat. Ava's eyes darted to the surroundings, taking in the quiet, dimly lit road they were on. It was a side street, not far from the station, but isolated enough that no one was likely to pass by for a while. Her senses immediately went on high alert. Something wasn't right. Was this really just a flat tire, or had Carter somehow orchestrated this? Great, Carter muttered under his breath. He threw open the door, stepping out of the car and slamming it shut behind him. Stay here, he ordered Mason before stalking around to inspect the damage. Ava's eyes followed Carter as he walked around to the front of the vehicle, watching as he crouched down by the tire. She turned her attention to Mason, who still sat tensely behind the wheel, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. He hadn't gotten out of the car yet, and Ava saw her opportunity. "The Mason," she said softly, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. "You need to listen to me." The Mason's eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror, meeting hers briefly before he looked away again. His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. "Ryan, you know this isn't right," Ava continued, her voice low but urgent. "You know Carter's dangerous. He's already crossed the line, and if you don't stop him now, things are going to get worse." Mason shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but still said nothing. Ava pressed on. "You still have a chance to make things right," she urged. "Take me back to the station. Let them verify my credentials. You don't want this on your conscience." Mason's hands tightened around the steering wheel, his knuckles turning even whiter. She could see the conflict playing out in his eyes, the battle between loyalty to his partner and the growing realization that Carter was spiraling out of control. "Sam's not. He's not a bad guy," Mason muttered under his breath, but his voice lacked conviction. Ava shook her head. "He's lost, Mason. You know that. And if you don't do something, you're going to lose yourself too." And Mason clenched his jaw, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. For a moment, Ava thought she might have reached him, but then the car door slammed again, and Carter reappeared at the driver's side window. "It's the front left tire," Carter said, his voice tight with frustration. "We'll need to change it." The Mason hesitated, his hands still gripping the wheel as if he was considering whether or not to comply. Carter shot him a sharp look, his voice dripping with barely concealed anger. "Well, get out and help me." Ava watched as Mason slowly opened the door and stepped out of the car, his movements sluggish and reluctant. He glanced back at Ava briefly, and she could see the doubt in his eyes. She had gotten to him, but it wasn't enough, not yet. As the two officers moved to the front of the car to deal with the tire, Ava's mind raced. This could be her chance. With both of them distracted, she might have an opening. Her wrists were still bound, but she had been trained to handle worse situations. She quickly assessed her surroundings, looking for anything that could help her. That's when she noticed the faint glint of something metallic on the floor beneath the front seat. She leaned forward, straining against her restraints to get a better look. It was a small pocket knife, probably dropped by one of the officers at some point. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was it. If she could just get her hands on that knife, she might be able to free herself. Keeping one eye on Carter and Mason, who were still occupied with the tire, Ava carefully maneuvered her body, sliding herself forward on the seat as much as the cuffs would allow. She stretched her fingers toward the knife, her heart racing as the tip of her fingers brushed against the cold metal, almost there. Just as her fingers closed around the handle of the knife, the sound of raised voices outside caught her attention. She froze, holding her breath as she listened. "Damn it, Mason, what's wrong with you?" Carter's voice was low but filled with fury. "You're acting like you're scared or something." Mason's voice came next, quieter but still audible. "I just don't think we should be doing this, Sam. We should have taken her to the station. We're not handling this right." Ava's heart raced. This was the moment. The tension between the two men was coming to a head, but she needed to be ready to act. "Not handling this right?" Carter's voice dripped with contempt. "I'm doing what needs to be done. You're the one who's gone soft." Ava risked a glance out the window, her fingers still clutching the knife. She could see Mason standing rigidly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked torn, as if he was moments away from either snapping or backing down completely. "To listen to Mason's," Carter continued, stepping closer to his partner, his voice now a low growl. "You want to be a hero? Fine, but don't think for a second that you're going to stop me. But we're in this together, whether you like it or not." Mason's shoulders slumped slightly, the fight draining out of him. Ava's heart sank. She had been so close to getting through to him, but Carter's grip on him was stronger than she'd realized. She needed to act now, before it was too late. With a deep breath, Ava quickly worked the knife into the small gap between her wrists and the metal cuffs. Her movements were quick but careful, her training taking over as she focused on freeing herself without drawing attention. The sound of Carter and Mason's argument outside provided just enough cover. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ava felt the cuff on her left wrist give way. She slipped her hand free, quickly working on the other cuff until both hands were finally loose. She rubbed her wrists, trying to ease the pain from where the metal had dug into her skin. Ava's heart pounded as she glanced toward the front of the car. Carter and Mason were still distracted, their voices growing louder as their argument escalated. She knew she didn't have much time. Carefully, she reached for the door handle, her fingers trembling slightly from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had to move fast, but she also had to be smart. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. Taking a deep breath, Ava quietly pushed the door open, stepping out of the car with as little noise as possible. She crouched low, using the shadows to her advantage as she moved around the back of the car, keeping out of sight of the two officers. She could hear their voices more clearly now, and it was obvious that things were about to boil over. "Damn it, Sam. This isn't right." Mason snapped, his voice louder than before. "I'm not going down with you on this." Carter's response was a harsh, angry laugh. "You don't have a choice, Jack. We're in too deep. You think they're just going to let us walk away from this? Think again." Ava's mind raced as she crouched behind the car, trying to decide her next move. She couldn't just run, they would catch her before she could get far, and she couldn't overpower both of them on her own. She needed a plan, something that would turn the situation to her advantage. That's when she saw it, the tire iron leaning against the back of the car, left there by Mason when they had started working on the flat. It was a long shot, but it was her only chance. With a silent prayer, Ava reached for the tire iron, gripping it tightly in her hands. She would only have one shot at this, and she couldn't afford to miss. Carter's voice rang out again, sharp and commanding. "Get back in the car, Mason. We're finishing this." Mason hesitated, his hand hovering near his gun holster. Ava's heart pounded in her chest. She had to move now. With a burst of speed, Ava lunged from the shadows, swinging the tire iron with all her strength. The metal made contact with Carter's arm just as he turned to see her, the force of the blow sending him stumbling back with a grunt of pain. Mason's eyes went wide as he watched the scene unfold, his hand still frozen near his gun. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, the only sound the heavy breathing of all three people as they stared at each other in shock. Ava didn't wait for Carter to recover. She spun toward Mason, the tire iron still in her grip. "Don't do it," she warned, her voice low and steady. "You don't want to make this worse." Mason's eyes flicked to Carter, who was clutching his arm in pain, then back to Ava. His hand dropped away from his gun. For a moment, no one moved. The tension was thick, the air heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Ava held her breath, waiting to see what Mason would do. Finally, with a heavy sigh, Mason stepped back, raising his hands in surrender. Ava's heart pounded in her chest as she slowly lowered the tire iron, her grip still tight on the metal. She had done it. She had turned the tide. This wasn't over yet. Ava stood, gripping the tire iron tightly, her chest heaving from the adrenaline coursing through her body. Mason had raised his hands in surrender, his face pale with fear and indecision. Carter, clutching his arm where Ava had struck him, glared at both of them, his eyes alight with rage. The atmosphere was thick with tension, every breath drawn feeling like the calm before a storm. This wasn't over. Ava knew Carter too well by now. He wasn't someone who would let go of control easily. Mason, despite his apparent surrender, was still caught between the right thing to do and his misplaced loyalty. She needed to push harder to tilt the scales completely in her favor before Carter regained any ground. "And Mason," Ava said, her voice steady but firm, locking eyes with him. "You know this isn't right. You know he's taken it too far." Mason's gaze flicked between Ava and Carter, hesitation visible in every movement. He had already begun to falter, but doubt was not enough. Ava had to make him act. "This isn't what you signed up for," she continued, carefully stepping closer. "You're better than this. Don't let him drag you down." Carter snarled from where he stood, his hand gripping his injured arm. "Don't listen to her, Jack," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "You think she's telling the truth? You think she's going to let you walk away clean after this? She's playing you." Ava's heartbeat quickened. Carter was pushing hard, knowing Mason was the weak link, and she could see the uncertainty creeping back into Mason's eyes. She had to change the game now, or Mason would crumble under the weight of Carter's manipulation. "She's FBI." Carter snapped, his voice dripping with venom. "Do you know what that means? If we let her go, it's not just her we're dealing with, it's the whole damn system. They'll come after us, Jack. They'll bury us." Ava took a deep breath, maintaining her calm even as the threat of everything going wrong loomed large. She couldn't let Carter get in Mason's head any more than he already had. "I'm not here to bury anyone," Ava said, her voice low and controlled. "But I will if I have to." Her eyes locked on Mason's. "You have a choice right here, right now. You can either do what's right or you can go down with him. But understand this, he's finished. And if you stay with him, so are you." The Mason flinched, the conflict visible on his face as his hand hovered uncertainly near his holster. He took a deep breath, glancing back at Carter. "Sam, maybe we should just..." Carter stepped forward, the movement sudden and aggressive, cutting Mason off. "You think we're just gone half?" He barked, his voice rising. This bitch, his finger stabbed in Ava's direction, his line through her teeth. "Do you think she cares about you? She's just trying to save her own skin." For a moment, everything hung in the balance. Ava could see Mason wavering, could almost feel the weight of his indecision, but she couldn't wait any longer. Carter was too close to regaining control. "She's right," Mason muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, but enough to make Carter freeze. Ava seized the moment. "Mason, you need to make the call," she said quickly. "We don't have much time. Carter's not stopping until this gets worse." Mason's eyes darted to her, then back to Carter. His breath was ragged, and his fingers twitched nervously at his side. Ava watched as he took a small step back, the gesture minimal but enough to signal that he was breaking free of Carter's influence. Carter saw it too, and his eyes flared with fury. "You're not actually falling for this, are you, Jack?" he spat. "After everything we've been through, you're going to turn on me because of her." Mason's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Ava could see the shift happening, but it wasn't fast enough. Carter was already calculating his next move. "Think, Jack," Carter continued, his voice growing more desperate. "She's just trying to divide us. We're too deep into this to back out now. You really think we can just walk away from everything we've done?" Ava's fingers gripped the tire iron tighter, her pulse hammering in her ears. She couldn't let Carter regain control, not now, not when they were so close to a resolution. "Make your choice, Mason," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the thick tension. "But understand this, if you side with him, you're going to lose everything." For a long moment, Mason didn't move. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached for his radio. The action seemed to shock even him, as if he wasn't entirely sure what he was doing. Carter's face twisted with fury, but he stayed silent, watching with cold, calculating eyes. "Mason, don't." Carter's voice was quiet now, almost a plea, but there was still an edge of menace in it. But Mason's resolve was growing, the decision forming behind his gaze. He brought the radio to his mouth. "This is Officer Jack Mason." "Hi." A gunshot rang out, shattering the night's silence. The sound was deafening, and for a moment, everything stopped. Ava's blood ran cold as she saw Carter standing there, gun in hand, smoke curling from the barrel. Mason crumpled to the ground, clutching his side as blood began to pool beneath him. Carter didn't even glance at him. His eyes were fixed on Ava, a dark, twisted grin spreading across his face. "I warned him," Carter said, his voice low, almost conversational. But he didn't listen. Ava's heart pounded in her chest as she stared down at Mason, who was gasping for breath, his face contorted in pain. This was it. Carter had crossed the final line. Her grip tightened on the tire iron. She had one chance left, and she wasn't going to waste it. With a burst of speed, Ava lunged toward Carter, swinging the tire iron with all her strength. Carter barely had time to react before the metal connected with his wrist, sending the gun clattering to the ground. He howled in pain, but Ava didn't stop. She brought the tire iron down again, this time aiming for his leg, knocking him off balance. Carter fell to the ground, his face twisted in agony, but he wasn't done. He lashed out, grabbing for Ava's ankle, trying to pull her down with him, but Ava was faster. She kicked him away, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts as she stepped back. Carter lay there, writhing in pain, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Ava stood over him, her chest heaving, the tire iron still in her hand. For a moment she considered finishing it, but something held her back. She wasn't like him. She wasn't going to cross that line. Instead, she turned to Mason, who was still lying on the ground, his face pale, his hands pressed tightly against his wound. "Stay with me, Mason," she said urgently, dropping to her knees beside him. "We're going to get you out of here." Mason's eyes fluttered open, and he gave her a weak nod. I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Save it," Ava muttered, glancing back at Carter to make sure he wasn't getting up. "We're not done yet." She reached for Mason's radio, bringing it to her mouth. "This is Special Agent Ava Smith. I need immediate backup at my location. Officer down, armed suspect in custody." There was a long pause on the other end of the radio. Then a voice crackled through. "Copy that, Agent Smith. Units are en route." Ava let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. They weren't out of the woods yet, but help was coming. She just had to keep Mason alive until they arrived. She glanced back at Carter, who was still lying on the ground, groaning in pain. He wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. As the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, Ava's mind raced. She had survived the night, but the real fight was just beginning. Carter wasn't the only one involved in this conspiracy, and she was going to make sure every last one of them was brought to justice. But for now she had won, and that was enough. The sirens in the distance grew louder as Ava crouched beside Mason, pressing her hands against the wound on his side. His face was pale, the pain clearly etched into his features, but he was still conscious, his breath shallow and labored. Blood seeped through her fingers as she applied pressure, desperately trying to keep him stable. "Hang on, Mason," she muttered, her voice filled with urgency. "The backup is almost here." The Mason winced, his eyes fluttering open. "I'm sorry," he rasped, his voice barely audible. Ava shook her head, pushing the guilt out of her mind. "Don't worry about that now," she said firmly, her mind racing. She couldn't let herself be distracted. Carter was still lying on the ground a few feet away, clutching his injured leg, but she knew he was still dangerous. Carter's breathing was ragged, but his eyes were sharp and alert, scanning the area. He was biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. Ava couldn't afford to let her guard down, not for a second. "You're not going to make it out of this," Agent Carter spat, his voice filled with venom. "Even if you manage to get away from here, you've barely scratched the surface of what's really going on." Ava glared at him, her mind whirling with possibilities. There was more, of course. There was always more. Carter wasn't just some corrupt cop working in isolation. He was connected to something bigger, something she hadn't fully uncovered yet, but she had enough to know he wasn't bluffing. The depth of this conspiracy ran far deeper than she could have imagined. "What do you mean?" Ava demanded, tightening her grip on the tire iron as she rose to her feet, keeping her eyes locked on Carter. "Who's pulling the strings?" Carter chuckled darkly, his voice laced with bitter amusement. "You think I'm going to tell you? You think knowing will change anything? You're already in too deep. They know who you are, Ava. They've known for a while." Ava's blood ran cold at his words, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Who?" she pressed, taking a step closer, her mind racing through the possibilities. How long had they known? Who was behind all of this? Carter just smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "It doesn't matter. You're a dead woman walking." Ava clenched her jaw, her grip tightening on the tire iron. She knew Carter was stalling, trying to buy time, but the sirens were getting closer, and the backup she had called for would arrive soon. And she didn't need to get everything out of him now, but she needed enough. Ava took a deep breath, her gaze narrowing as she stepped closer to Carter. "You're not going to win this," she said coldly. "Whatever plan you're a part of, it's unraveling. The FBI is onto you, and soon your little network will be exposed." Carter's grin only widened. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? You're so sure of yourself." He shook his head, a twisted smile still on his lips. You don't know the half of it. Before Ava could react, Carter lunged at her, his movements fast despite his injuries. She barely had time to raise the tire iron before he was on her, grabbing for her wrist. The two of them struggled, each trying to gain the upper hand. Carter's strength was surprising, even in his weakened state, but Ava was faster. With a sharp twist, she wrenched her arm free and brought the tire iron down, striking Carter's injured leg. He cried out in pain, collapsing to the ground once more, but Ava knew he wasn't done yet. She quickly moved to retrieve his gun, kicking it out of his reach before turning back to him. "You're not getting away this time," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Carter groaned, clutching his leg, but the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. "You'll never stop them," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "You think you're so untouchable, but they're already inside. They've been watching you the whole time." Ava's stomach twisted at his words. She didn't have time to interrogate him further. The sirens were practically on top of them now, and she needed to make sure Mason was stable before help arrived. But Carter's words lingered in her mind, casting a dark shadow over the victory she thought she had won. She crouched down next to Mason again, her hands moving quickly to check his wound. His breathing was shallow, but he was still holding on. "Help is almost here," she whispered, her voice softening. "You're going to be okay, Mason." Mason's eyes flickered open, and he gave her a weak smile. "You really think I'm worth saving?" he rasped, his voice barely audible. Ava met his gaze, her expression serious. "You made the right choice," she said quietly. "That's all that matters." The Mason's eyes fluttered closed again, but Ava could see the relief in his face. She held his hand tightly, refusing to let go until she heard the screech of tires as the backup units finally arrived. The next few minutes were a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices as paramedics rushed to Mason's side. Ava stood back, watching as they loaded him onto a stretcher, her mind still racing with everything that had happened. Carter was being restrained by two officers, his face twisted in pain and fury as they handcuffed him and led him to a waiting squad car. But as he was shoved into the back seat, he shot Ava one last look, his eyes burning with hatred. "You're too late," he hissed, his voice barely audible over the noise of the scene around them. "It's already in motion." Ava's stomach churned at his words, but she didn't respond. She couldn't let herself get rattled. Not now. She had what she needed to take this operation down, but the sense of unease lingered. As the paramedics drove off with Mason, Ava turned to one of the officers on the scene, her mind still focused on the bigger picture. "I need secure communication back to my team at the FBI," she said urgently. "We're dealing with something far bigger than just Carter. There's a network we need to dismantle." The officer nodded and gestured toward one of the squad cars. "You can use the radio inside. It's a secure line." Ava gave him a quick nod and moved toward the car, her mind racing with the implications of everything Carter had said. "They know who you are." They've known for a while. Who was they? How long had they been watching her? And more importantly, how much of her investigation had already been compromised? As she reached the radio inside the car, Ava's hands trembled slightly as she keyed in the secure frequency to reach her FBI handler, Supervisory Agent Christine Martinez. The line crackled for a moment before Christine's familiar voice came through, calm but alert. "Ava, what's your status?" Ava took a deep breath before responding. "Carter's in custody, but we've got a bigger problem. He's connected to a larger network, and they know about the operation. They've known for a while." There was a brief pause on the other end, and Ava could almost hear the wheels turning in Christine's mind. "How compromised are we?" Christine finally asked, her voice clipped with urgency. "I'm not sure yet," Ava admitted. "But Carter made it clear that there is more at play here. We need to move fast before they disappear." Christine's voice hardened. "Understood. I'll mobilize a team. We'll track every lead Carter has touched and start dismantling this network from the ground up. But we need to be careful if they've infiltrated our systems. We can't trust anything right now. Ava nodded, even though Christine couldn't see her. I'll keep digging from my end. We need to figure out who's at the top of this. You'll have the full support of the Bureau, Christine assured her. Just be careful, Ava. If they've been watching you, they'll try to strike again. Ava's grip tightened on the radio as Christine's words sank in. She had been working this case for months, carefully weaving her way into the organization, but now it seemed like the entire time they had been watching her just as closely. I will, she said finally, but we're not going to let them win. As she disconnected the call, Ava leaned back in the seat of the squad car, exhaustion washing over her. The immediate danger had passed, but the real fight was just beginning. Carter's arrest was only the first step. Now she had to untangle the web of corruption that stretched far beyond this one rogue cop. The conspiracy ran deeper than she had ever imagined, and she knew that the coming days would test her in ways she hadn't yet faced. But one thing was certain: she wouldn't stop until every last piece of this network was destroyed. The days that followed Carter's arrest were a blur of briefings, investigations, and non-stop coordination. Ava barely had time to sleep, her mind constantly racing as she pieced together the web of corruption that Carter had hinted at. Every lead she and the FBI uncovered only revealed more layers, more connections, and more people involved than they had originally imagined. The network wasn't just local, it had tentacles stretching into law enforcement, politics, and even federal agencies. Ava's suspicion that Carter had only been a small part of a much larger conspiracy was confirmed, but what kept her awake at night was the fact that they had been watching her from the start. Every move she'd made while undercover had been monitored, and they had known all along that she was coming for them. As she sat at her desk in the FBI's headquarters, surrounded by files, reports, and digital maps tracking the criminal network's connections, she knew the time had come to go after the real players behind this operation. Carter's arrest had given them the leverage they needed. He had cracked under interrogation, revealing key names and locations. But Ava knew they had one shot at bringing down the entire organization, and it had to be perfect. Supervisory Agent Christine Martinez entered the room, her face grim but focused. She dropped a folder on Ava's desk with a thud, her voice low and serious. It's time. We've identified the location of their main base of operations. Ava looked up from her computer, her eyes sharp with determination. Where is it? An old factory on the outskirts of town. We've confirmed that several of the top members of the organization will be there for a meeting tonight. Christine paused, her gaze locking with Ava's. This is our chance to take them all down in one sweep. Ava nodded, already feeling the surge of adrenaline building in her chest. I'll lead the team, she said, her voice steady but resolute. She had come too far to let anyone else handle the final takedown. Christine hesitated for a moment, clearly concerned about Ava's safety. You've been too close to this, Ava. Are you sure you're ready for this? They've been watching you. They'll be expecting you. Ava's jaw tightened, her mind flashing back to Carter's twisted grin, the hatred in his eyes when he told her she was a dead woman walking. He had tried to break her, but she had survived. And now she was going to make sure no one else had to endure what she had. I'm ready, she said firmly. This ends tonight. Christine didn't argue. She knew better than to try and stop Ava when she had her mind set on something. We'll have SWAT on standby. You go in with a small team first, but once we have confirmation of their presence, we'll move in with full force. Ava stood, slipping her FBI-issued pistol into her holster as she prepared herself mentally for the mission. The weight of the operation bore down on her, but it only fueled her determination. This wasn't just about taking down a corrupt network. It was personal now. The old factory was a decaying relic, hidden behind rows of abandoned warehouses and overgrown brush. As Ava and her team approached the perimeter, they moved silently, their dark uniforms blending into the night. Every step they took was calculated, every breath measured. The air was thick with tension, and Ava could feel her pulse quicken as they neared the entrance. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was razor sharp. This was what she had trained for, what all those months undercover had led to. It was time to end this. "Position 1 ready," whispered one of the agents into her earpiece, signaling that the team was in place. Ava gave a quick nod to the team leader beside her. "On my mark," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "We move in." Anne. The seconds ticked by in agonizing silence as they waited for the right moment. Ava's hand hovered over the door handle, her muscles tensing with anticipation. She knew what was at stake. If even one of these criminals slipped through their fingers tonight, the entire operation could unravel. But she wasn't going to let that happen. "Go," she hissed, and in one swift motion, the door to the factory was breached. Ava's team flooded into the building, their movements smooth and practiced as they fanned out, securing each section of the factory with military precision. The building was mostly dark, the only light coming from dim overhead lamps casting long shadows across the concrete floor. They moved quietly, sweeping through the corridors until they reached a large central room. Ava's heart pounded in her ears as she peered around the corner, her eyes landing on the group of men gathered at a makeshift table in the center of the room. She recognized them immediately, several of the most wanted figures connected to the arms trafficking and corruption network. This was it. Ava motioned for the team to move in, her finger resting lightly on the trigger of her weapon as they surrounded the room. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still as the reality of the situation sank in. They had them. FBI. Ava shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. "Hands where we can see them." The men at the table scrambled in shock, some reaching for weapons, others attempting to flee, but it was too late. Ava's team moved in swiftly, disarming and restraining them before they had a chance to react. Within seconds, the room was under control. The criminals were on their knees, hands cuffed behind their backs, while the team secured the area. Ava stood over them, her expression hard but her mind racing. They had them all, every last one of them. Except one. Ava's eyes scanned the room again, her gut telling her something was wrong. There was one man missing, the leader, the mastermind behind the entire network. She cursed under her breath, her mind racing as she realized that this was part of their plan. They had expected her. A sudden noise from behind caught her attention, and she spun around just in time to see a figure slipping out through a back door. Her pulse spiked, and without thinking, she broke into a sprint, chasing after him. Ava burst through the back door, the cool night air hitting her face as she spotted the man fleeing toward a nearby car. It was him, the leader. The man she had been chasing for months. He couldn't escape now, not after everything. She ran after him, her feet pounding against the pavement as she closed the distance. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice echoing through the empty lot. The man turned to look at her, his face shadowed in the dim light. For a moment, their eyes met, and Ava could see the recognition there. He knew who she was. He had been watching her from the start. But he didn't stop. Ava raised her weapon, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "This is over," she shouted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "You're not getting away." The man hesitated for a split second, glancing back at the car, but before he could make another move, Ava pulled the trigger. The shot rang out through the night, and the man crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg as he let out a pained cry. Ava approached him cautiously, her weapon still trained on him as she reached for her radio. "Target down," she said, her voice filled with relief and exhaustion. "We got him." The operation was a success. With the leader of the network captured and in custody, the entire organization collapsed. Over the next few days, Ava and her team worked tirelessly to dismantle the remaining parts of the criminal empire, ensuring that every last piece of the operation was taken down. As Ava sat in her office, reviewing the final reports, she felt a sense of closure wash over her. It wasn't over. There were always more battles to fight, more corruption to uncover, but for now she had won. Carter was in prison, the criminal network was dismantled, and justice had been served. But as she stared out the window, Ava knew that this was only the beginning. The corruption ran deep, and there would always be more to uncover. But whatever came next, Ava was ready.